Well, we are in week 2 of a series through the I am statements of Jesus in the Gospel of John. Several times he uses these analogies. I am the bread of life. I am the true vine. I am the good shepherd, and so on. In John chapter 8, verse 12, Jesus said this, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Now, some of the other analogies Jesus used to describe himself are a little more difficult for us to easily interpret unless we come from a background where these analogies show up. So when he says, I am the true vine, if you don't know much about agriculture, you have to have somebody teach you about agriculture before you can understand that analogy. When Jesus said, I am the gate into the sheepfold, you'd need to know something about shepherding in order to understand what Jesus was saying there in that analogy. When Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life, you would need to know something about Old Testament theology, Old Testament religion, in order to understand what Jesus was trying to say about himself there. But when Jesus says in this passage, John chapter 8, I am light, I am the light of the world, all of us can easily understand that because all of us understand the importance of light. It was back in the 1800s that some cities, as nightlife began to develop, they knew that in order to keep their citizens safe and to move around easily, they needed to come up with a source of light. And so a number of cities in the United States and in Europe developed what became known as moon towers. These tall structures that had carbon arc lighting on the top of it that was able to cast light in a 1,500-foot radius, bright enough to read a pocket watch. There are only 17 moon towers in the world in existence today, and all 17 of them, as many of you know, are right here in the city of Austin. Now, maybe you've seen some of these moon towers downtown or in the surrounding area. Zilker Park, the Zilker holiday tree is built around one of these last remaining moon towers in the world. And these days, Austin, the city of Austin, keeps up with these for nostalgia and for notoriety. But it did have a practical purpose when these moon towers were first erected in Austin in the late 1800s. At that time, there was a serial murderer on the loose known as the Servant Girl Annihilator. And so these moon towers went up in part, some people say, in reaction to that. And once the moon towers went up, the killings went away, and there were no more victims easily found. And according to local lore, the Servant Girl Annihilator left Austin and went to London and became the man known as Jack the Ripper. Now that is very likely a Texas tall tale, but it does indicate to us how important light is to our lives today. For our well-being and for our safety, we need light. Jesus said in John chapter 8, I am the light of the world. Now in this statement, Jesus made a claim about himself, and then he extended an invitation for you to come to him. So he made a claim and he extended an invitation. You can see in your sermon notes that those are the things we're going to look at today, the claim he makes and the invitation that he extends. So let's look first at the claim he makes. I am the light of the world. Now, what was he saying about himself here? Life makes possible 3 things: life and knowledge and joy. Life and knowledge and joy. That's what light makes possible. And so when Jesus said, I am the light of the world, he said, this is what I make possible in your life. Write these down on your notes. First of all, I make life possible. You know, because of the way the earth tilts as it rotates around the sun, for a part of the year, the northern hemisphere is tilted just a little bit away from the sun, and we call that wintertime. And in wintertime, leaves die off the trees, lakes freeze, a farmer's field can't generate any sort of crops, just that little tilt away from the sun, and all of a sudden, life, as we're accustomed to, completely changes. So when Jesus said, I am the light of the world, he was saying, when I come into your life, I make real life possible. Things that are cold and frozen about your life start thawing out. things that are infertile about your life, things that are unproductive about your life, start seeing blossoms and blooms and fruit. Jesus says, I make life possible. Here's a second thing. When Jesus said, I am the light of the world, he was saying, I make knowledge possible. I imagine a lot of us, we have a night light in our house so that when we have to get up in the middle of the night, we don't, put our bare foot down on a Lego or stumble over furniture or something like that. Why? Because light shows us the way things really are. Light shows us the situation as it really is, and so we need a night light when it's dark in our house. When we come to church and we sing these songs that John and the team lead us in, and when we study the life and teachings of Jesus, it is as if light is being cast into our life and into our world. We can learn more about ourselves, and we can learn more about the world in which we live and operate if we have Jesus casting his light upon our lives and upon our world. First of all, we can understand ourselves better in light of him. I think one of the biggest barriers to really knowing yourself is the shame and the sense of failure that some of us have over parts of our lives that we wish were different. Now, in order for real growth to take place, in order for real maturity to take place, you've got to know yourself. But if you are so busy trying to hide your shame and try to defend yourself, you're not really going to know yourself, right? I mean, when it comes to the things we regret, things that we wish we had done differently, what do we tend to do instead of really knowing ourselves, really admitting and acknowledging these things? It's too shameful to do that. So what do we end up doing? We end up minimizing it. That's one thing we do. We play it down. We convince ourselves it really wasn't as serious as we think it is, or we shift blame over to somebody else, or we end up ignoring it entirely by filling our lives with all kinds of distractions and trying to self-medicate with various forms of addictions and that kind of thing. What are we doing? We're masking over things that we really don't want to know about our lives, things we don't want to acknowledge about our lives. But you see, when Jesus comes into our life, the one who knows us best and yet still loves us most, then we get a chance, we're free to acknowledge the stuff about our lives that we're even ashamed of, because it doesn't jeopardize our relationship with Jesus. He accepts us wholly and completely. And so therefore we are liberated, we are free to be, at least with him and at least with trusted individuals, open and honest about the kind of people we are. And that's the only way we're going to grow and develop, is if we're open and honest about our failures, our mistakes, what we wish was different about our lives. But again, we're not going to be able to do that unless the light of Jesus comes in and reveals to us who we are, not to ruin us, not to shame us, but to set us straight, to make things work and make things right. Somebody said that one evidence that you are in a relationship with Jesus, one evidence that you're growing in your relationship with Jesus, is that you repent more, not less. Now, that's kind of ironic, because some people would think, well, when you first come into a relationship with Jesus, especially if you came in from an acknowledgement of kind of a ruin you've made of life, that's the point at which you've got this all this stuff to confess to Jesus, all this stuff to sort of turn over to him. And it's certainly true at the beginning of the Christian life, but here's the thing. As you move through the Christian life and you read the words of Jesus and you see his expectations, you see so much more to repent of. You see so much more about your life that still needs fixing, still needs correcting. And so when we are in a relationship with Jesus and growing in that relationship with Jesus, we find ourselves repenting of more things, not fewer and fewer things. So we can understand ourselves better because of the light of Jesus. But we can also understand the world in which we operate better if we're seeing it in the light that Jesus casts upon our circumstances. In his sermon on this text, John Piper said this: "Nothing will be the same again when you have him as your light. Everything looks different in the light of Christ. Yes, even earthquakes and tsunamis and suffering and death. Until his light fills the earth as the waters cover the sea, until it banishes sin and sickness and pain and earthquakes to the outer darkness, until then, even now, his light will help you bear the sorrows of darkness. It will be a soft glow to comfort you in your lonely room after the devastating loss. It will be a lamp on your troubled path. It will reveal the wise and loving face of God behind every frowning providence. So what Piper was trying to tell us there is that there are circumstances that confuse us and frustrate us and don't make sense unless we see them in the light that's being cast across those circumstances. The more we learn about Jesus, the more we learn about his sovereignty, the more we learn about his plan, the more we learn about his presence in our lives, even when things are disappointing and not working out, even then we learn more about the reality of this world because of the light of Jesus. So when Jesus said, I am your light, he was saying three things. He was saying, I make life possible. He was saying, I make knowledge possible. Here's the third thing. I make joy possible. I make joy possible. Our youth group just returned from a mission trip to Alaska, and one of the things they will tell you, if you haven't talked with them about it yet, is how long the sunlight lasted this time of year. I mean, it was dark only for a few hours. It was just a lot of sun, but that's because it's summertime in the northern hemisphere. That isn't always the way it is. In the wintertime, it's just the opposite. There's a lot of darkness and very little light, and that impacts people. It can impact us emotionally. A number of people in the northern hemisphere, especially in the northern parts of the northern hemisphere, experience during the winter what's known as seasonal affective disorder. And it makes you depressed and listless and sad and inactive. And seasonal affective disorder, conveniently, is spelled the acronym SAD, SAD. Now, doctors will prescribe something really, really practical for people dealing with seasonal affective disorder. What do they prescribe? More light. Open up the curtains during the day. Get out in the little bit of light that you have when you do have the light in the northern part of the northern hemisphere. Make sure to increase the wattage of the light bulbs in your house. Maybe even get a fluorescent light panel that can go right next to your desk when you're working today. The point is to flood your life with more light, and that can impact your mood. It can impact your attitude. Now, when Jesus said, I make joy possible, I want you to notice there is this difference between Jesus saying, I'm here to make you happy, and I'm here to bring you joy. Now, some of you would say, no, that's the same thing. That's the same word. They're just interchangeable. Happiness, joy, happiness, it's a reference to the same. No, not at all. In fact, that one of the best things that you can do for your life personally is to learn to distinguish between these two words and use the words appropriately. When we use the word happiness, we're referring to circumstances. When you get the job you've been hoping for, it makes you happy. When the doctor's report comes in the way you wanted it to, it makes you happy. When circumstances work out the way you want, it brings happiness. Jesus did not say, I am your light because I'm here to make you happy. He said, I'm your light because I'm here to bring you joy. Joy is something that transcends the circumstances. Joy is this confidence, knowing that God causes all things to work together for good for those who love the Lord. Joy it comes from the confidence in knowing that there is this plan that God is working out. And though things are often ruined now and there are setbacks and all of that now, we are ultimately coming to a new heaven and a new earth where God is going to set everything right. When you operate in that kind of world, even when circumstances are unhappy, you can maintain this abiding joy. That's what the Apostle Paul was talking about. The Apostle Paul was in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, wrote about this. He said about his own life, we are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. Therefore, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. What was Paul doing there? He was writing about joy in the midst of unhappy circumstances. So there's a difference between happiness and joy. Jesus doesn't say, I'm your light because I'm here to make you happy. That can happen sometimes. It doesn't happen other times. But Jesus says, I'm here for your joy. And as we see the light of Jesus being cast into our lives and being cast over the circumstances of the life that we go through, we have an opportunity to have this abiding joy, even in the highs and lows and ups and downs of life. So Jesus said, I'm the light of the world. I make life possible. I make knowledge possible. I make joy possible. And when you think about not just what he said, but when and where he said it, it's even more profound. In John chapter 8, we are told when and where Jesus said, I am the light of the world. When was it? On the last night of the Feast of Tabernacles. Where was it? Next to the treasury in the temple. Now, this may not mean a thing to you, but it was incredibly significant to Jesus' first followers and to the first people to read the Gospel of John. The Feast of Tabernacles, what was that? That was a holy day, that was a holiday that was meant to commemorate and remember the Exodus. You know the Exodus story where Moses says, let my people go, and the Egyptian Pharaoh let them go, and they left Egyptian slavery. And on their way toward the promised land, God guided them. He gave to them a very special sign of his presence. What was it? A column of smoke by day and a pillar of fire by night. What does a pillar of fire generate? It generates light. And so the Feast of Tabernacles was a time to remember that very moment. And so what the priests would do in the temple compound was they would set up these 4 huge candelabra, and each night they would light them during the Feast of Tabernacles as a symbol, as a sign of that time thousands of years ago, when the glory of the Lord, the presence of the Lord, was with them in that column of fire that cast light over them as they were traveling in the wilderness. Now, this is where Jesus was. He was at this very spot across from the treasury in the temple where these candelabra were set up to celebrate this light of God's presence. This is where Jesus said, you want light? I'm here. I am the light. You are celebrating the light of God's presence in the Exodus thousands of years ago. Well, guess what? Here I am. Now, that's a remarkable thing, isn't it? That Jesus portrayed himself and presented himself in this way. Imagine just a few weeks ago, during all our patriotic celebrations, celebrating the 250th anniversary of America, that somebody stood up on the other side of some place where a lot of flags were flying and said, I am the true flag that gives you real freedom. Probably somebody would go, that guy's a nut, right? And yet this is exactly what Jesus was doing. He was standing across the temple compound from where this candelabra were being lit, and he said, I am the light. If you want to celebrate the light of God's presence, here I am. Now, like I said, this is a remarkable thing, because if you take a religion course in a number of universities, secular universities or some more liberal private universities, somewhere along the way, or if you look at a religion course or a religion program on PBS sometimes, somewhere along the way you're going to have somebody say that the divinity of Jesus, the idea of Jesus as divine, did not develop until Christianity spread out of Judaism and got into Greek and Roman culture. Because Judaism was this radically monotheistic culture, but Greek and Roman culture had all these stories about various beings that looked human but were actually divine. And so it became easier for people to understand Jesus as divine as it got out in Greek and Roman culture. Nothing could be further from the truth. Here in John chapter 8, well before Christianity got out into Greek and Roman culture, here was this thoroughly Jewish man standing in a thoroughly Jewish temple in celebration of a thoroughly Jewish event, the Exodus. And he was saying, you looking for God's glory? Here I am. The divinity of Jesus was right at the very beginning of the Christian movement in the claims of Jesus himself. In Ezekiel, the Old Testament prophet Ezekiel has this vision of the Shekinah glory. The Hebrew word is Shekinah, the Shekinah glory of God lifting up out of the temple and departing Jerusalem. And it was Ezekiel's way of showing the people, this is why Babylonian captivity took place. Babylon came in and ruined Jerusalem only because God allowed it to happen. He lifted up and departed. His glory departed from the temple, and Babylon was destroyed. Now Jesus, several thousand years later, is standing right in those very temple courts. And he's saying, you looking for the Shekinah glory of God? I'm back. Here I am. That is a remarkable claim. And listen, you can't be neutral when somebody makes a claim like that. You either conclude that this guy's a nut, and why would anybody follow him, or you fall down on his feet and worship him because what he's saying is absolutely the truth. You can't be neutral one way or the other. You've got to say, I can't believe my friends believe this stuff. I can't believe my friends commit themselves and commit their time and money to get this word out around the world. Or you say, I'm joining my friends because what Jesus said is actually true after all. Jesus made an astounding claim when he said, I am your light. And then Jesus extends an invitation to us. In John chapter 8, verse 12, he says, whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. So Jesus said, I am the light, and then he says, follow me as your light. What does it mean to follow Jesus as your light? Three things. Write these down in your notes. First of all, live hopefully. Live hopefully. In the last chapter of the last book of the Old Testament, Malachi chapter 4, God speaks of the last day of history like this. For you who revere my name, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in his wings. Isn't that a beautiful image? And in fact, you can understand why it shows up in one of our Christmas songs. The arrival of Jesus is the arrival of the Son of Righteousness, who will one day arrive at the second coming with healing in his wings. He is the sun, he is the light, and wherever the rays of that sun are cast, healing takes place. Nature is restored. Chaos is subdued. Death is robbed. Tears are wiped away. And Jesus said that in some mysterious, remarkable way, you and I are going to be light beings like that. Because we are united to Jesus and belong to Jesus, who is himself the Son of Righteousness, we will be sons and daughters of righteousness ourselves. Jesus said this in Matthew chapter 13, verse 43. He said that on the last day, when we're gathered to the returning Christ to meet him in the air, then, he says, these are the words of Jesus, then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Now, I don't know all that means, but I can't wait to find out. How about you? My question is, do we live like this is true? I mean, if this is the story in which we operate, that Jesus is coming back to set everything right, that the rays of the sun of his righteousness will be cast across the nations, cast across the ruin of our world to fix it, and you and I will somehow share in that glory ourselves, do we live like that's true? Do we make our decisions in light of that? Do we process grief in light of that? Do we face down the pain and limitations of our earthly body in the light of that? Are we less driven by materialism and consumerism in light of that? You see, this isn't just a nice little sing-songy type of thing Jesus said when he said, I am the light of the world. He was saying something incredibly profound about himself, but he was also saying something incredibly profound about the way you ought to be looking at your life now, because he is the light of the world. Here's a second thing. Live with integrity. Live hopefully, but then live with integrity. In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 8, Paul wrote, you were once in darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Live as children of light. Now notice how I worded it. He said, you are light in the Lord. Because of what Jesus has done for you, because of his grace and his mercy, you now have this status. The Bible does not tell us at any point, now do this, do this, do this, follow this list of rituals, and then maybe God will decide to be impressed with you and make you one of his kids. That's not the way it goes. It's his mercy and his grace, as John was telling us early in preparation for that new song. It was his grace and his mercy that set us with this status, established us as the children of light. But then, what does Paul say? Because this is your status, how should you live? Live as children of light. Live accordingly. Now, our whole life needs to be understood in light of that light. Some of us, we are doing things in the dark, and you're hiding them from your spouse and your friends and yourself. The tendency of human history is for that to eventually be exposed. It does occasionally get exposed in history. It gets exposed in your own life. That which you thought you had so well hidden gets exposed. When that happens, God isn't going, gotcha. God is going, let's fix this. And since you haven't been fixing it in private, I'll make you fix it in public. But if it doesn't get exposed in our own earthly life, guess what? It's going to get exposed eternally, ultimately. Here's what Jesus said in Luke chapter 12, verse 3. What you have said in the dark will be heard in the daylight. What you have whispered in the ear in the inner rooms will be proclaimed from the rooftops. And Simon Peter said this in 2 Peter chapter 3. The earth and everything done in it will be laid bare. And in light of this, he says, what kind of people ought you to be? You ought to live holy and godly lives as you look forward to the day of God and speed its coming. What are these passages saying? That one day, if it hasn't happened, if the exposure of our darker deeds hasn't happened in this life, it'll happen in the next. And so the way we live, we ought to live in such a way that there just isn't that much to expose on the final day. That's the way we ought to be living, because we have this status. We are already declared as the children of light because of what God has done for us. So live accordingly. So finally, live attractively. Live hopefully, live with integrity, and then live attractively. And what I mean by that is attract people to this light that you yourself have found. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9 says, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Now, when Simon Peter said that we're to declare his praises, he wasn't just talking about singing songs on Sunday morning, although we should do that. He wasn't just talking about, having good conversations with people in your life groups, your Sunday school classes, although we ought to do that. But we ought to just be public about what we're excited about, our relationship with God. We ought to be public about that. When you praise your kids, parents, when you praise your kids, what are you doing? You're telling them you're proud of them because of something that they've done, something they finally did right. And you praise them for that. And it's an encouragement, right, for them to keep going with it sometimes. But it's entirely right for us as parents to say good things to our kids about what they're doing. When we praise God, what are we doing? We're saying good things to God about what he's doing. So there's a way you can do that in a way that's artificial and fabricated and false. And I think sometimes that's what people think of when they think of witnessing or evangelism. But there is a way of doing that is entirely in concert with your own personality and in line with the relationships that you're building with people. But the point is that we are called upon to be who we are in the world. We are the children of light now, as we've already seen. And so we just simply need to let that process happen naturally of communicating to others the light that we found in Jesus Christ himself. It's the same Jesus who said, I am the light of the world. He said in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, you are the light of the world. Now think about that. Because of Jesus coming into your life and being your light, he has now made you his light ambassador to go out and let other people know that light can be found that will give them full knowledge, give them full joy, and give them full life. Just as the three things we talked about at the beginning of this message. And those of you who are not yet believers, our encouragement to you today as we gather in this place is let today be the day that you decide, Jesus is my light. So let's go to the Lord in prayer. And as people who need to make that declaration for the first time, or for those of us who need to make it for the 1,000th time because we are believers, we need to lift up this prayer. Jesus, you are the bright glory of the presence of God. I confess that to be true, and I commit to walk in that light. Without you, I'm unable to see myself and my circumstances clearly, but in the light of your presence, I can be honest with who I am and what needs to change about my life. And in the light of your presence, I can make sense of the heartbreak and setbacks that I face in this world. Point out ways where I still make decisions as if I'm still living in the dark. Ways where I'm failing to live as a child of light. and help me to carry the light of your presence into the lives of those who need your light. And we pray these things in your name, Jesus. Amen.